Morning. So we're going to do a special bake session this morning because tomorrow is Valentine's Day, and I found a recipe which I quite fancied, and I mentioned to the wife, she said, "Oh, I've got to have that Valentine's Day." We're doing a baklava cheesecake. A baklava cheesecake. That's like 3 meals in one. Sorry, PK. So it's going to be basically a cheesecake, which is honey flavoured, and then we're going to top it with a baklava top, if you like. Okay, so it's quite a complicated dish. It takes quite a bit of time because we have to make certain things, chill them down or freeze them before we can assemble it and then cook it, and then it takes quite a while to cook it as well. So there's effectively about four elements to this. There's the crust, there's the cheesecake mix, there's the baklava topping, and well, I suppose it really is part of the baklava topping is the honey syrup that goes into the baklava. So because the baklava needs to chill for a good while, or go in the freezer for at least half an hour, we're going to make that first. Okay, so I'll explain as we go all the bits and pieces what we need. Right, the overall cheesecake we're going to make in a 9-inch pan. So the idea being the baklava topping sits just inside the crust at the edges. So I've got a plate here which conveniently is about ½ inch smaller than the diameter of that. Now we're going to make the sheet up on a piece of greaseproof paper. Okay, and so I'm going to use this plate as a template, and you're going to want to cut out at least 35 sheets of phyllo pastry. Now, because obviously it don't come in circles, and even if it does, it probably won't be the right size. What we can do is the trimmings we can sort of use to make some layers. So I'm going to start cutting, using my plate as a template, my phyllo pastry, okay, which if it's frozen, obviously you need to get it forward. All right, this has just been in the fridge. You're going to want getting on for 40 sheets of phyllo pastry. But like I say, we can make some of the internal ones made up from all the trimmings. All right. So I'm going to get cutting my sheets of phyllo first. Okay, so I've got about 40 sheets. Actually, I was quite lucky. I could get half of them complete, the other half just slightly bits missing from the edges. So I probably won't need any of the trimmings, but I've kept them just in case. Right, I've just melted down in the microwave 113 grams of butter. And then the final couple of ingredients, you want a teaspoon of cinnamon, and then you want some nuts. Now I've got mixed pecan and pistachio. It's entirely up to you what you use. Okay, these are going to be finely chopped up. I'm going to use the food processor for that. I've got, how much of that have I got? I've got 125 grams of nuts, about half and half pistachio and pecans. So they're going in there. I'm going to add the cinnamon, teaspoon of cinnamon, and then basically you're going to want to just chop them up quite fine, okay? And then we actually start assembling the actual layers, but I'll get this chopped up while they're off camera because it's a bit noisy. Now we're going to start assembling it. I'm doing it on a sheet of greaseproof. You could use a silicone baking mat, which would probably make it easier, but we're going to be pre-cutting, and although we're not meant to cut all the way through, I'm not going to ruin my silicone mats by ending up cutting. So I'm going to assemble them on a piece of greaseproof. You might have fun later when we separate it, but anyway. And then what we do is take the first sheet of phyllo, okay, I think there's 2 there, and we lay that onto the sheet. Well, I'm pretty sure there's 2 there, but it ain't separating. And we just take that melted butter and we just coat the pastry in it. Now we don't want to drench it, okay? We just want to make sure we just covered it over, and then we're going to come back here. This is why I'm saying it might stick later, because if any butter gets onto the grease proof, you'll probably find then when it's been in the fridge or freezer it'll stick to it. But anyway, so there's one sheet done, and what we now do is we take another sheet. Again, this is things, I'm pretty sure there's two there, and carefully lay that over the top of that first one. Okay, it doesn't matter if it's a little bit wrinkled, and we butter that one. Now we're going to essentially do that until we've got 10 sheets of just plain buttered phyllo pastry. All right, so I'm going to finish off getting these 10 done, and then we'll get to where we start adding in nuts. Okay, so I've got 10 buttered, put the 10th one on, I butter the top, and we now take about a quarter of the nuts and we sprinkle this over the top. Okay, doesn't matter if it's a little bit more concentrated in the middle. Okay, so a little bit more there I think. And now what we're going to do is we're now going to add 5 more buttered layers. So take another sheet, lay that on top, and then we just like we did the first lot, butter it and build up 5 more layers. Okay, so that's 5 more buttered layers. Guess what? We're now going to go back to our nuts, and we're going to take a second quarter of the nuts, and we're just going to sprinkle them over the top. Okay, and then we're back to layering again another 5 layers of phyllo pastry. All right, so you pick it up. There we go. So just like before, 5 layers, butter each one. Okay, so that's the next 5. So now we're going to take half of the remaining nuts and sprinkle them on. Okay, I think I might have used a bit too much the first layer, to be honest. So anyway, we just sprinkle them over, and we're back to another 5 layers of phyllo, buttered each time. Okay, so that's another 5 layers. Now we take the remaining nuts and we just sprinkle them on top. And we're now going to lay 10 layers. So we started with 10 buttered layers. We've done quarter of the nuts, 5, quarter of nuts, 5, quarter nuts, 5, quarter nuts. And now final layer of 10. The packet's a bit weird. They said there was approximately 10 layers of phyllo. So you would imagine that's therefore, if I was to cut one circle out of each of them, that's 10. And I've got 2 out of a pack, so that's 20, and I use 2 packs, but I look like I've got quite a few left over. Anyway, that aside, I'm now going to butter this and build up another 9 layers. There you are. So there's our completed baklava topping. So what I'm going to do with that now, I'm going to put that in the freezer because we want the butter to harden. That's just simply so that we can cut it or pre-cut it, and also we'll be able to handle it to put it on top of the cheesecake. So I'm going to put that in for about 30 minutes. If it's going to take longer than 30 minutes to get ready to use it, then just take it out and put it in the fridge. So I'm going to put that in the freezer, add a little bit of salt out, and then we'll get making the crust. Okay, so to make the crust, it's basically a pistachio pecan shortbread crust. Obviously we're going to want some nuts again, so I've got about 100 grams of pistachio and pecans, again about half and half, and they're going to go in the blender, and we want these obviously finely chopped. You're going to want some vanilla extract, a teaspoon of that. You're going to want 221 grams of flour, plain flour, about 96 grams of icing sugar, and 170 grams of butter. So your butter's in my bowl, ready to blend in, but before we do anything else, we've got to chop the nuts. So I'm putting them in there, and now when it comes to blending it all into that butter, and you know what it's like when you add icing sugar, I'm going to actually put the icing sugar in with the nuts. Okay, so that hopefully that will, initially it's going to go everywhere, but at least it's partly contained. And then when it's all nicely all mixed together, we're going to blend it a little bit easier into the butter. So I'm just going to chop these up. Right, so the first thing first is we've got the butter in the bowl, and now I'm just going to cream them up so it's all nice and soft and creamy, if you like. Okay, so now in goes the flour. Okay, and teaspoon of the vanilla extract. There's my things all evenly on there. Okay, and now we're just going to obviously whisk this together. Get the lid on that before I spill it. Okay, so I'm going to mix that in, and then finally, before I've whisked this in too much, I'm just going to add the nut mixture and the sugar, and we're now going to do this in fairly gently. Okay, we don't want to overdo it. Okay, but now just going to mix all this together. Right, now got our floured tin, and so what I'm going to do is, you can use butter, it's up to you. I'm just going to use a bit of spray, and I'm just going to then wipe it all over, bit kitchen towel, make sure it's all nicely greased or oiled, ready for putting the dough in. Okay, so all we're going to do now is we're going to put some dough into the pan, and we're just going to press it down onto the bottom. Okay, although it looks quite dry and crumbly, I find you can sort of stick it together. So you're also going to want to build up the edges. Okay, so it's just a matter of gradually using up this dough, making sure it's evenly over the bottom. We've got it up the sides. Okay, and then once we've done that, that's the wife making all the noise. Once we've done that, we're then going to chill that in the fridge while we make the cheesecake filling. So, crust is all done, that's in the fridge chilling, the baklava's still in the freezer. So before we make the cheesecake mix, we've got to make the syrup, which is to go over the baklava, but that needs to cool down before we can add it, so we need to make that now. You could make it at the start, okay, entirely up to you. Basically you make it and then it's just got to chill. So I've got 66 grams of sugar in a pan. I want a tablespoon of lemon juice. Okay, chuck everything in there together. You want about 75 mils of water, and then, and I forgot to do my conversions because this was an American recipe, so of course it's in cups. You now want some honey, some clear honey, and you want about a third of a cup of that. Okay, so well, you don't sit there waiting while I measure a third of a cup, so I'll come back to you when I've done it. Right, so I've measured out about a third of a cup, that's gone there. Now I can keep that because when we make cheesecake we're going to be putting more honey in, and so we'll need to use that to measure it anyway. I bet that's cold now. Oh yeah, not half. So what we're now going to do is warm this up until it's all dissolved in, okay? And then we're going to boil it for about 3 minutes. You need to keep stirring it because we don't obviously want it burning on the bottom, not making caramel. Okay, and then once that's had it's about 3 minutes boiling, just set it aside and let it go down to warm temperature. And while that's doing that, we'll get on with making the final bit, which is the cheesecake mix. Okay, and then it's a matter of putting that into the crust, putting our baklava on top, and pop your uncle pannies around. Okay, so the syrup's done, that's cooling. I've started assembling the ingredients for the cheesecake. Before we do that, I've taken the baklava topping out of the freezer, okay? And what we're going to do is we're going to pre-slice it into 8. We don't want to go all the way through, right? We just want, easier to do it on here, but it's flatter, go down to about the bottom layer, okay? So you're going to want a fairly sharp knife, but like I say, you don't want to go all the way through, otherwise it's going to be a bugger to pick up, all right? So it's just a matter of quartering it to start with, and then obviously turn it into 8. Now, once we've done that, whoops, went a bit deep on that one, that will now go back into the fridge. Butter everywhere. Okay, that's going to go back into the fridge just to keep cool, so it helps keep it solid while we make the cheesecake. Right, so at this stage you want to put your oven on. So I think it's 350 Fahrenheit, I don't know, but about 170 Celsius. Okay, might want it a little bit lower than that if you're a fan oven. And then you're going to want some cream cheese. So I've got 453 grams of cream cheese. I've got half a cup of honey measured out. You're going to want, it says 1/4 cup of sour cream. So basically, one of these little containers of sour cream. 1 whole egg and 1 large egg yolk. And then you're going to want some vanilla essence and some ground cinnamon. Okay, you're going to want your whisk to mix it all together, and then this is the final bit we're making before we start assembling the cheesecake. So first off, we're just going to cream the cream cheese with the whisk until it's all nice and creamy and sort of like mixed down. You might need to scrape around the sides, and then we'll add in that honey and whisk that in with it. So, I don't know if I said, it's about half a cup of honey there. I've actually put a little bit extra in because obviously trying to make sure you get it all out is going to be a pretty difficult task. So, half a cup, whatever that is in mils, okay, get that in there, and then we just combine these two together with the whisk again, okay. Right, now we take our sour cream and we put that pot in there, and again all we're going to do then is mix all this in, making sure it's well incorporated in, okay. So this is a bit active for Valentine's because I think the first time we properly had baklava was on our honeymoon, okay. And who cannot like cheesecake? Cheesecake. Cheese and cake. Sorry, Peter. Had to be done. Right, so I'm just going to get them mixed in. Okay, so now in goes that egg and egg yolk. And again, all we want to do is make sure that's all thoroughly mixed together. So our final thing is we're now going to add half a teaspoon of ground cinnamon. Okay. And 2 teaspoons of vanilla extract. 1, 2. So now just going to give that final all whisked together. Hang on there, bring that in there, getting all around your fingers. So I'm just going to mix all that in together, and then we're ready to start assembling. Right, so I've got the cake tin with the crust in it, and what we're now going to do is we're going to pour the cheesecake mix. Probably be better if I poured it rather than doing this, but there you go. So all I'm going to do is I'm now just going to transfer this into there, okay, and then once we've done that, we'll get the baklava topping out and we'll finish it off. Remember, the oven needs to be on by now. It's up to temperature, so it's all ready to go. Okay, so I put it on a tray, simple, baking tray, simply because it's got one of these removable bottoms, and knowing my luck, it'll start leaking out the bottom. So our final little trick is we've got to carefully remove our baklava topping and then rest that on top. The bugger's starting to sink. Okay, now that now goes in the oven for up to an hour. Okay, so I'll put that in there. Now you need to keep your eye on it, because if you've got quite a bit of crust at the sides, you might find that starts burning or browning. If that starts happening, just put some foil around the edge to cover the crust. Shouldn't really need to cover over the baklava. Okay, so it's now just a matter of leaving it to cook. Obviously your syrup needs to be done. If you haven't done it yet, do it now, because we want it cool when we pour it on top. Now the baklava cheesecake has had about getting on for 70 minutes. Okay, it could take as long as 80. Part of the way through, about 45 minutes in, I just put a little bit of foil around the edges because the crust was starting to catch a little bit. Actually, it was more where the cheesecake mix actually come up over the top, was starting to catch a bit. The pressure of that pushed that up, so you didn't really see the crust. Now, good job did put it in a tray, because like I said, this has a removable bottom on this, and butter did leak out. So what we're going to do now is just going to leave it to cool for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to use the syrup that we made to start spreading it over and feeding it in. But we need to just let it cool a little bit first. So we're going to take some of that syrup, and we're now just going to pour it over the top. We're not really trying to get it all in right away, all right? So it's just a matter of pouring some on, slower the better, and then just let that soak in for a bit, and then we'll pour a little bit more on top, spread it all around, let that soak, and carry on until we've used all that syrup up, at which point I'm going to take it off the tray. I'm going to keep it in the pan for now, and I'm going to put it in the fridge. Now ideally this wants to chill for overnight, at least 6 hours, okay? Whether the missus can wait that long. All right, so we ain't going to be tasting it for a little while yet. So that's your baklava cheesecake. I know it's not quite finished yet, but all we're going to do is finish that syrup. So that's your baklava cheesecake ready for Valentine's.